Hi, welcome to our Veteran Speaker Series. I'm Dr. Julie Ducharme and excited today to have Dr. Tiffany with us. And I want to give you guys a little intro. Tiffany has an amazing background, which I'm very excited to talk with her. As you guys know, we are big on supporting our women veterans. And so Dr. Tiffany is a licensed board certified clinical psychologist, a veteran U.S. Air Force officer, and a special operations trained psychologist that's taken part in the selection and assessment of special forces personnel. She's also created Rhythm Restoration, which we'll have to share your link from She Talks, where you talk about that. And it's an innovative faith-based method that uses visualization and bilateral stimulation to help those who have endured psychologically painful life experiences. She also is the author of Peace After Combat, Healing the Spiritual and Psychological Wounds of War, which is also, we'll need to post the link for that in the chat so we can make sure everyone can get your book. And I also love that you co-wrote and implemented Abundant Recovery Ministry, a Christ-centered recovery program. And to top that all off, you are CEO and co-founder of Stand Up and Recover, a Christian nonprofit organization aimed at bringing healing and insight to those dealing with traumatic life experiences. And also, one more thing, I know we could go on for a while because you have such an amazing bio, but one more thing here, you are currently the chief of the largest behavioral health clinic serving Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. So welcome to the show, Tiffany.
Thank you, Doc. It's such a blessing to see your lovely face again and just to have this opportunity to talk to our vets about the transition process and what to expect, how to manage it, how to cope spiritually, psychologically, financially, emotionally. There's so much to address.
I know, and I'm really excited because I'm all about, our women and seeing you be in such amazing positions to help and support people and using your skills from your experiences in the military and just transforming into these amazing things you're doing. So I love this. So I want to hit on all of these things, but I want to go back first to your transition out of the military, because I don't know if this was your plan or you were focusing on doing this, but I know a lot of people are going, okay, wait, how did you have a book, you have this, how did you do that? So let's talk about the transition first.
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I think there was a point in my career, military career, I only did about 5 years. I was a captain and a major select at the time in the Air Force. And foremost, I am a homebody. I love to be home. I love to have roots. I love home renovation. I like to create my own home. And so one of the things was I did not like moving over and over again. And I wanted to establish my own home with the people around me that I love so much, my family. I wanted easy access. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to get out. But I also have this tendency to color outside of the lines. I like to be creative. And I found that being in the military is absolutely fantastic. You have to understand and write standard operational procedures for everything that you're doing, SOP this, SOP that, dress right dress. And it's really great. And it activates a certain hemisphere of my brain, my left one, but doesn't quite trigger that right one. And I was having that itch. So I felt I had to color outside the lines. And so I thought to myself, well, you know what? I think I will be a GS employee. It has such an easy translation. Now, honestly, compared to other veterans, I think I had it easier. And the reason why is because I commissioned as an officer as a clinical psychologist. So I was already a doctor when I came into the military. And so it's an easy transition out because I know exactly what I'm going to do. My career translates into the civilian sector. So really, I just looked up USA jobs, prayed over it a whole lot to make sure I had the proper alignment and let the Lord lead the way to where I was supposed to go. Home was ideal, but I had my mindset on different ideas. And lo and behold, here I am. I'm back in El Paso, Texas at Fort Bliss, and I have the blessing and the opportunity to be chief of the largest multidisciplinary clinic on post. So with all that being said, it was truly just being patient. It was visualizing my future. And we're going to talk a whole lot more about that. Please ping me on the topic of visualization and seeing where we want ourselves, because that is so important. But I had this vision that I wanted. And, with my faith and the Lord on my side, I got to where I needed to be. And that was a huge blessing.
Yeah, I really love hearing that. And, when you talk about being a doctor and knowing your profession, Dr. Karen Walker, which you met, when she left the military, she was had a doctorate in organizational psychology, and I remember her. She was an officer as well, and everyone was telling her like, "Oh, you're going to transition so easy, like it's going to be so easy." And I remember her telling me that that year transition was one of the toughest years of her life, because even though she knew her profession, she was struggling to find her place in the world. And I think it's really great for all of our military to know, whether they have a doctorate or not, they really have to visualize and figure out where they want to go first, because we get a lot of veterans who just get out of the military and they just don't know, right? We don't know. And so one of our last speakers said they spent almost 3 years before they transitioned out, like focusing on what they want to do, going back to school, really preparing for that transition. And I think that's so important, because it sounds like that's what you did as well. You really had a vision, you prepared for it, you prayed over it, you really searched for it and kind of had that purpose when you came out. And I really like that. And I think that's something that we need to continue to hone, that we're encouraging people, like, let's start thinking now. Maybe you're 3 years out, maybe you're 4 years out, but what can you do to prepare to transition? So I love that. Now I want to talk about your rhythm restoration, which I heard some of it at our She Talks, but it's really unique. And I think it could be I know it is helpful to our veterans. So I'd love to talk about, could you tell us what it is? How did it come about? How do you utilize it?
Doc, that's so sweet of you. So I'm going to piggyback off of what you just said earlier about the transition process. So it may seem, as a doctor and clinical psychologist, I had an easier transition because what I did in the military translates to the civilian sector. But like you were saying earlier, the reality is we don't know all the nuances of what's going to spring up for us. We have to have a general idea of where we're going, and time and patience, prayer and practice of what we are doing will start opening new doors. Because I can tell you this, when I was in the Air Force in my last month, I would have never guessed that I would have written a book called Peace After Combat: Healing the Spiritual Psychological Wounds of War, nor would I have guessed that I would have created Rhythm Restoration Method, nor would I have guessed I would have written an Abundant Recovery Ministry. I mean, there were so many things that I could not have predicted, but I had an idea of where I wanted my spirit to lie. And my spirit really wanted to be grounded in helping other people and being a servant leader.
Yeah.
So transitioning from that big picture to what is rhythm restoration, I created this concept. It's a form of visualization. It's really spiritually oriented from my perspective. Now I can make it wherein we can eliminate to some degree the spiritual aspect and make it grounded in science. But the reality, I call it rhythm restoration because rhythm helps us regulate our autonomic nervous system. It helps to calm us down. So we do some bilateral stimulation in rhythm restoration where you tap alternating back and forth, because when you alternate back and forth and you're tapping like you go walking or running, any sort of movement that is bilateral actually triggers both hemispheres of the brain. And when you're triggering both hemispheres of the brain, you're using the whole brain to process an experience of the past, or you're using the whole brain to visualize an experience that you want for yourself in the future. And so with rhythm restoration, one of the key components is visualization. Now, Doc, our brain doesn't know the difference between a real and an imagined experience. And so what I like to tell my veterans is, hey, you got to see what you want for yourself. You may not know all the nuances or the details of it, but you got to see the place where you want to go and feel the joy that you want to experience from what you're doing in your heart. And when you start doing that, you actually start laying down new neural networks in your brain, and you start gravitating to the places that you need to go. I mean, there's a book out there called The Secret, called The Laws of Attraction. And the reality is, it's also in scripture where it says, for as a man thinks, so is he. And that's how we think in our own mind. Our visualization, our imagination, it's what manifests. What we put out there in our thinking is what comes right back to us.
Yeah. And that resonates with me because being a former athlete, our coach would tell us, I want you to visualize the win. I want to visualize this. And at first, being young, I just thought like, wow, that's really silly. But he would make us sit and be like, close your eyes. And I want you to envision hitting the ball and doing that. And it's interesting because I don't know if he had the psychology background like you did, but he was having us visualize hitting and doing these different things. And it was interesting how it did really help, because you would start to see what you were going to do, and then you'd get on the court and you'd see that improvement. And at the time I was a young 18 or 19 years old, but years later I look back on that and I spend a lot of time visualizing what I want and what I want to see today now, because it really does, at least I've felt the benefits of the change, so when I'm thinking about like what I want to do, or if I'm having a rough day, right? Like I'll sit down and just be like, okay, no, like we need to visualize. Sometimes I'm visualizing just being on a beach, which I live at the beach, but I mean like beach, like I'm on the beach with a drink, just like toes in the sand, just calming myself down, and sometimes I'm visualizing just dominating something, but that really resonates with me. And it's interesting how you said it lays down new, do I have this right, neural pathways?
Yeah, they're neural pathways, neural networks, whatever you want to call them. Let me give you a really cool tidbit of research. So there was this doc back in the day, I think Dr. Kelly Cole might be her name. She did a research project wherein she had people visualize doing exercises, another cohort who actually did the physical exercises, and one just as a baseline. And in the end, the ones who visualized and did the exercises were clinically significant in their gains for muscular strength in those areas of the body. And you're thinking, how? I'm visualizing, but what you're doing in your visualization is you're strengthening the neural connections in your motor cortex.
Wow.
Just by the process of visualization. So when you actually do the exercise, your neurons are already firing in the perfect circuitry. It doesn't need to practice, but you're able to increase that muscular strength. It is so phenomenal. I think you and I should just visualize having our six packs right now on the beach, right? And our little itty bitty bikinis with the super tan.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I love it. And hearing this really helps me to encourage other people, when people are struggling, like, hey, I don't have the psychology background. I have more of the business and sports background, but I definitely know that there is a huge psychology component to all of this, and being successful. And so when those people are struggling, that's something that I can suggest and say, listen, let's just get rid of the negative. Let's focus on the positive. What can you see yourself doing? And one thing I would say that I've learned is that the brain is so powerful. I mean, it's just so powerful. And I love this because it's really looking deep in and seeing what we can do. And you don't have to be an athlete. You don't have to be this person or doctor to be able to visualize, the success and joy in your life. So I love this. And I want to transition to talking about your book, Peace After Combat, Healing with Spiritual Psychological Wounds of War. And while you're telling us about this, I'm going to grab the link and post it in the chat for anyone who wants to find it. Because is Amazon the easiest way to find this, or what's this?
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, christianbooks.com, any major retailer, including Walmart.
So let's talk about this, because I haven't got to read the book yet. It's on my list. I've got like 12 books on my desk here. And so I'm going to the Galapagos, and my thought was I have like 23 hours of airtime, so I can take these books with me and be reading the whole time. But I wanted to talk about this, to encourage all of our veterans to grab your book and read it. And how did this come about? Because we're not all authors. Like when I wrote my book, I never in my wildest dreams ever thought I would ever write a book. Like I was told that I was not smart enough to write a book. So when I finally wrote a book, my first book, it was very therapeutic and very transparent and honest. So I'd love to dive into the topics on this, how this came about, what encouraged you or inspired you to do it.
Oh, thanks for asking, Doc. Actually, let me just tell you, because I think it plants a seed back to my active duty days. I was really into this dystopian fiction world. Do you remember when the Hunger Games came out?
Yes.
What a hit that all was.
Yes.
I was like, you know what? I'm in the Air Force right now. I'm going to wake up at 0 dark 30 and start writing my new dystopian fiction. And I had all these ideas that I would get a publisher and an agent. And It was a whole bunch of crap that I wrote here, really. I finished the book. I put a whole bunch of queries out to get a literary agent. Obviously, I did not get one. It is so hard to get a literary agent. You have to like put queries out, and then the agents are what represent you for a publishing house. And so I thought, Lord, why did you put this crazy idea in my head to write fiction, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, well, I'm not feeling it right now, but I'm sure there's a reason why. So later down the line, as I got out of the military, I was actually bathing my son, and literally the clouds parted and light came through, and it was this revelation. God told me in my heart and my spirit, hey girl, you have to write a book about where I am in trauma, where I am in war. So literally the original title for the book was Where is God in War? Because every day from my active duty days when I was in the Air Force to while I was working for the Army as a civilian, my patients were sitting in front of me and saying, hey doc, where is God in war? Because one, faith and spirituality is the greatest protective factor when it comes to suicide prevention. And so they said, I lost my faith, and this was something that I clung to. And so one, it was helping them understand that God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them, and helping them to recognize that God is not the author of the bad things. In John 10:10, it says the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but God has come to give us life and to have it more abundant. And so I really wanted to provide a book that would educate them on what trauma is, how normal it is, right? How the brain functions, like the brain has to digest experiences just as the gut does, and how we do it. And I actually used a whole bunch of stories of veterans. They're fictional, but they have this real emotional undertone that is very true to what they experience. And that's where all the fiction writing came in, all the, writing in description and first person and making it gritty. There are some serious stories in there, very raw, very graphic stories, but it shows you the progress of how these service members are recovering from their trauma, actually rewiring their brains and using visualization as a means of healing. Because when all we see is our pain, we have these pain blinders on, right? The memory is stored away in the amygdala, which is the fear center. And when all we do is see that pain, we can only see it with blinders on. We can't see how God, life, the universe is working in our favor when all we see is pain. So we have to learn to remove those blinders. And when we start to see the good things and how God's responsible for the good things, that we're all going to experience suffering in life, no matter who we are, right? But that the Lord will make a way, the universe will make a way, people and love will make a way. When we start to see that and we change the memory of the trauma, we're actually changing it all the way down to the proteins, to the DNA of the memory that no longer files back into the fear center of the brain, known as the amygdala, but rather the hippocampus. So what I'm getting at here is helping them understand how we rewire the brain, some sort of techniques with rhythm restoration to rewire the brain, and an understanding of why we experience what we experience from a spiritual perspective. Lot said.
Well, and I like that you say we can rewire, we can change, we don't have to live in our pain. I think that's really important for everyone, because I have met people who are living in pain from 20, 30 years ago, and they seem like they're struggling to get out of that pain, to get away from it. They don't know how to let it go. And I think this is so important for our veterans, for anyone who's dealing with trauma, across the line, is understanding, that they don't have to live in pain anymore. And I think that's gives so much hope, and peace.
And when we go into the transition process too, when you're getting out of the military, I notice individuals who are going through the process of retirement, their battle rhythm, their operational tempo is what we call it, really slows down. And then what happens? The idle mind is the devil's playground. Everything that is unprocessed, unresolved, from painful combat experiences to life experiences, the SHIT hits the fan really quick.
Yeah.
Right. And then they don't know what to do, because their means of coping before, what was it? It was being fast tempoed. It was immersing themselves into work, grill, 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 mission, mission, mission. Right. And so when that slows down, then everything that's unresolved starts to expose itself. So one of my greatest tips for you in your transition process while you're still active duty is take care of your body physically, get the medical appointments that you need, and take care of your spiritual and psychological health. Go talk to behavioral health and process these unresolved emotions, because I promise you they're not going to get any easier when you get out. I always say a traumatic experience starts off like a snowball. It's something that can fit in the size of your hand, right? And the objective is to take that snowball and throw it against the wall so that it breaks up and doesn't hurt your life anymore. It's not something that's painful for you. But the reality is that PTSD, the hallmark trait of PTSD is avoidance. So we take that snowball from the trauma, we start pushing it in the snow, and guess what happens? It turns into the base of a snowman before we know it. And then we keep trying to avoid it, pushing it away. It becomes an avalanche in our life. So address it now before you get out, because your access to care and your access to resources surprisingly is much better while you're in the green suit than when you're out.
And that's interesting. I didn't know that. And I think that's absolutely 100% agree with you. A lot of times, especially in the older generations that I work with, grandparents or boomers, it's a very much negative thing to go see a therapist or a counselor. That was negative. You didn't do that. And I'm a huge advocate for it. I'm constantly like, we all need to go see a therapist. Like, we all have issues, and there's nothing wrong with going to someone and having someone help you work through those, because your significant other, your husband, your wife may not always be able to help you do that. Your friends may not always be able to help you do that, but someone who's trained in this may be able to help you work through it. And I think that's so important, because it's such a misnomer when people go, well, I don't want to go see a therapist. And I'd have to admit there's something wrong with me. I'm like, well, none of us are perfect. There's something wrong with all of us, and like you said, you don't have to go through war to have trauma. There's a lot of different levels of trauma. And so, I really think that's important. And I appreciate that tip, is that, our physical health is important, and our mental health is so, so important as well. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if our mental health isn't good, it can affect us physically as well, can't it?
Oh my goodness. Your brain generates more power in one day than all the cell phones in the world combined.
Wow.
Okay. So your thoughts are energy, positive energy and negative energy. Think of how powerful that brain is. And if those thoughts are energy, guess what happens to those thoughts? That energy is converted into electrical chemical impulses that impacts your entire body. Your mind controls your brain. So your thinking controls your brain controls your heart, and your heart controls the blood in the body. So what goes on in the head, the chemicals released by the head, impacts every single cell all the way down to your DNA.
Wow. I mean, and that's, you think about it and you think, wait, no, my brain couldn't be more powerful than all the cell phones in the world. But I mean, I think about how fear, right? We get fearful and then our stomach starts to hurt, or our heart beats fast, or we feel sick or overwhelmed, just with the feeling of fear, or anxiety, how it controls us. And so, it's just, I think it's so important even today. And we saw a lot of this during COVID, right? I mean, all of us, none of us were immune to what it was like to be, in our houses, away from friends and family, fearful of, the different things that were going on, and how powerful that was. I knew for my family and I was like, we're getting outside every day. We're getting outside, we're getting in the sun, we're going to go do something, we're going to go ride our bikes. We're not going to be stuck in this world, because you really started to feel just not great with yourself. Right. And it was like, well, I'm not doing anything. Why do I feel so bad? So just everything you're saying just so rings true with us. And as we're coming to the end of this, and by the way, I totally just bought your audiobook while we were talking. So I'm like totally like going to listen to you in my car now. I love audiobooks because I do so much driving and I can listen. So it's not going to have you on my radio. But we've talked about your book, and we talked about the rhythm. Let me get that right. Rhythm restoration.
Yes.
Now, do you only serve military, or does your organization do civilians and military?
So with my organization, I do a lot of education at churches, talking to people, doing podcasts, trying to spread the knowledge of the power of the mind, how faith is important in that equation, right? And that's what I'm out to do, okay? So unfortunately, I wish that I had a private practice. That'll probably be next on my list someday. I got to break the government chains that I have on, the shackles still, because I love my job and I love working for active duty. It's so hard to make that transition to real civilian life, so to speak. But right now, I only see the active duty service members that are stationed at Fort Bliss, unfortunately. Maybe later down the line, God willing, if that's in his plan for me, then I'll have a private practice where I can definitely give treatment to all.
Yeah, well, but so for any of you guys are listening, because a lot of veteran organizations and vets are part of this speaker series they're doing, they can contact you for learning more about what you do, education, training, all of those things. And of course, I really encourage you guys to grab Dr. Tiffany's book. I'm a big supporter of all of us authors, our smaller authors trying to become big authors. And are there any final tips or ideas or things you want to share before we finish out?
I just had the blessing recently to start a podcast with Behind the Service with another doctor, an Air Force veteran, Dr. Christina Seymour. She is actually a VA psychologist, and I am a psychologist for active duty. So we have both ends of the spectrum. It is actually called Peace After Combat, the same name as the book. So you can find that anywhere where podcasts can be found. And we have about 4 to 5 episodes now. We talk all about the brain. We talk about difficult life experiences, how to cope, manage, and function in the world at large.
That is awesome. And you guys can check in the chat for links to get in touch with Dr. Tiffany. We'll also put all of this in any of our posts, so you'll see all the links there. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing a bit about you and your experiences and what you're doing. And thank you for continuing to serve our military, because that's really important as well. So just thanks so much for being on the show.
It's a blessing, Doc.